Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Today we delve into a profoundly significant and undeniably contentious question. Should fossil fuels be completely banned? This discussion unfolds against the backdrop of an escalating climate crisis, evidenced by increasingly severe weather phenomena and rising sea levels, juxtaposed with our deep-seated societal and economic reliance on these very energy sources. International commitments, such as those outlined in the spirit of the Paris Agreement, urge decisive action, yet the path forward remains fiercely debated. Joining us to navigate this complex terrain are two distinguished experts, Mr. Kenji Tanaka, an environmental policy analyst, who will argue forcefully for a complete and rapid ban on fossil fuels, and Ms. Isabella Rossi, an energy economist, who contends that such a ban is neither feasible nor desirable in absolute terms, advocating instead for a more structured, gradual transition. Our format today will include opening statements from each speaker, followed by moderated discussion and rebuttals, concluding with closing remarks. Our objective is not necessarily consensus, but rather a nuanced, sophisticated exploration of the multifaceted challenges and potential pathways before us. Mr. Tanaka, you have the floor for your opening statement.
Thank you, Dr. Reed. Let me be unequivocal. A complete and expeditious ban on the extraction and combustion of fossil fuels is not merely an environmental necessity. It is a profound moral imperative. The scientific consensus, particularly highlighted in recent IPCC reports, is irrefutable. Anthropogenic climate change is accelerating, manifesting in devastating extreme weather events, catastrophic sea level rise threatening coastal communities, and an alarming loss of biodiversity that destabilizes ecosystems vital for human survival. We are witnessing droughts, floods, and wildfires of unprecedented scale and intensity, directly attributable to our continued dependence on coal, oil, and natural gas. Beyond the climate impacts, the direct public health consequences are staggering. Air pollution from burning fossil fuels contributes significantly to respiratory illnesses, cardiovascular diseases, and premature deaths globally, disproportionately affecting vulnerable populations. This is not just an environmental issue. It is a public health crisis demanding immediate cessation of the primary polluting activities. For too long, we have relied on incrementalism, on half measures and voluntary targets that have demonstrably failed to curb emissions sufficiently. The notion that we can gradually phase out fossil fuels over decades ignores the urgency dictated by climate science. We are facing an existential threat that requires decisive, transformative action, not timid adjustments to business as usual. Furthermore, the argument that we lack viable alternatives is increasingly untenable. Renewable energy technologies, particularly solar and wind power, have seen exponential growth and dramatic cost reductions. Coupled with advancements in energy storage solutions, grid management technologies, and energy efficiency measures, a transition to a fully renewable energy system is technologically feasible within a remarkably short time frame. A legally binding, complete ban would send an unambiguous signal to markets, unleashing an unprecedented wave of innovation and investment in clean technologies. This isn't about economic destruction. It's about catalyzing the next great industrial revolution, creating millions of high-quality jobs in green industries, from manufacturing and installation to research and development. The perceived necessity of fossil fuels is largely a construct of entrenched political and economic interests and outdated infrastructure, not an insurmountable technical barrier. A ban forces us to overcome these inertial forces. Therefore, I argue that a complete ban is the only responsible course of action to safeguard our planet, protect public health, and foster a genuinely sustainable and prosperous future.
Thank you, Mr. Tanaka, for that compelling opening statement. Ms. Rossi, we now turn to you for your perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Reed. Let me begin by stating clearly that I, and indeed the vast majority of economists and energy experts, acknowledge the profound reality and significant risks of climate change. The imperative to decarbonize our global energy system is not in dispute. However, the method proposed by Mr. Tanaka, a complete and abrupt ban on fossil fuels, is where I fundamentally diverge. Such a measure, while perhaps well-intentioned, would likely prove economically catastrophic, technologically premature, and profoundly socially inequitable. We must appreciate the sheer scale and pervasive integration of fossil fuels within the current global economy. They underpin not just electricity generation and transportation, but also heavy industry, manufacturing processes, agriculture through fertilizers, and the production of countless petrochemical products essential to modern life. Implementing an immediate ban would trigger an economic shockwave of unprecedented magnitude. We're talking about potentially hundreds of millions of job losses globally, not just directly in the fossil fuel sector, but rippling through countless dependent industries. Supply chains would collapse, leading to shortages of essential goods. Energy prices would inevitably skyrocket, imposing crippling costs on households and businesses alike, and likely triggering widespread stagflation or worse. Furthermore, serious questions remain regarding energy security. While renewables have made remarkable strides, their inherent intermittency poses significant challenges for maintaining reliable, baseload power on a global scale, 24/7. The necessary grid infrastructure upgrades and energy storage capacity required to compensate for this intermittency globally are simply not yet in place, nor can they be deployed instantaneously. A premature ban risks widespread blackouts and energy rationing, undermining public support for the energy transition itself. Crucially, the socio-economic impacts would be disproportionately borne by developing nations. Many lack the vast capital resources required for a rapid transition to renewables and associated infrastructure. A ban could plunge millions into energy poverty, hindering economic development and exacerbating global inequalities. We must also consider the financial stability implications. A sudden ban would create trillions of dollars in stranded assets, investments in fossil fuel infrastructure rendered worthless overnight, potentially destabilizing global financial markets. Instead of a blunt, absolute ban, I advocate for a managed, pragmatic, yet ambitious transition. This involves implementing robust carbon pricing mechanisms to internalize environmental externalities, significantly scaling up investment in renewables and grid modernization, and developing phase-down strategies tailored to specific sectors and regions. We should also invest in transitional technologies like carbon capture, utilization and storage, CCUS, for hard-to-abate sectors, and potentially advanced nuclear power, rather than prematurely discarding potential tools. The goal is decarbonization. A complete ban is a potentially self-defeating instrument.
Thank you, Ms. Rossi. You've both laid out starkly contrasting visions. Let's move into our first round of moderated discussion. Mr. Tanaka, Ms. Rossi raises compelling points about immediate economic dislocation and energy security. How can a complete ban realistically address the immediate needs of industries and populations heavily reliant on fossil fuels today without causing the widespread hardship she describes? How do you ensure the lights stay on and essential industries continue functioning during the inevitably turbulent period immediately following such a ban?
Dr. Reed, the concern about dislocation is valid, but it must be weighed against the catastrophic and escalating costs of inaction. The economic damages from unchecked climate change, rebuilding after superstorms, managing droughts, dealing with mass migrations, will dwarf any transition costs. A complete ban necessitates a concurrently implemented, massive public investment program, akin to a wartime mobilization. This program must focus on rapid deployment of renewables, grid upgrades, and extensive worker retraining and social support systems. A just transition framework. Funding can be sourced from redirecting the trillions currently spent on fossil fuel subsidies globally, supplemented by carbon taxes or wealth taxes. Regarding energy security, the transition doesn't happen overnight. The ban forces an accelerated, planned deployment, prioritizing grid stability through smart grids, diversified renewables, and storage. It requires robust planning, yes, but it's technically achievable if the political will driven by the ban exists. The hardship of transition, managed correctly, is far preferable to the hardship of climate collapse.
Thank you, Mr. Tanaka. Ms. Rossi. Mr. Tanaka frames the debate in terms of existential risk, suggesting that the gradual approach you advocate, while perhaps economically smoother in the short term, is potentially too slow. Given the scientific consensus on potential climate tipping points, beyond which changes become irreversible, isn't there a grave danger that a managed transition simply won't decarbonize fast enough, ultimately incurring those very catastrophic economic costs Mr. Tanaka warns about?
Dr. Reed, the urgency is undeniable, and the risks associated with tipping points are precisely why we need effective, sustainable policy, not policy that risks collapsing under its own weight. My concern with an immediate, absolute ban is that its sheer impracticality and the resulting socioeconomic chaos could lead to a massive political backlash, potentially derailing climate action altogether for years, if not decades. A failed, overly ambitious policy can be far more damaging in the long run than a determined, strategically implemented, albeit gradual, one. We need policies that maintain public and political support throughout the transition. Furthermore, a managed transition allows for course correction based on technological developments and economic realities. It enables us to accelerate action where feasible, for instance in the power sector, while developing solutions for harder-to-abate sectors like aviation or cement production, where viable non-fossil fuel alternatives are still nascent. Risking societal breakdown through an unworkable ban is not a prudent response to climate risk. It's substituting one catastrophe for another.
We now move to the rebuttal phase. Mr. Tanaka, you have the opportunity to respond directly to Ms. Rossi's arguments.
Ms. Rossi paints a picture of insurmountable economic hurdles and unreliable technology, but this underestimates both the dynamism of innovation spurred by clear policy signals and the true cost of our current path. The economic argument consistently downplays the colossal and rapidly accumulating costs of climate inaction. We are already paying billions annually in disaster relief, healthcare costs related to pollution, and lost agricultural productivity. These costs are projected to skyrocket. Investing in a rapid transition, even if initially expensive, is economically rational when viewed against the alternative of climate breakdown. It's an investment, not just an expense. Regarding energy security, advancements in battery storage, hydrogen fuel cells, advanced geothermal, and particularly smart grid technologies that manage demand and integrate diverse renewable sources are progressing rapidly. Regions like South Australia or countries like Denmark have demonstrated high levels of renewable penetration while maintaining grid stability. It requires investment and intelligent design, which a ban would mandate. The argument that a ban stifles the economy is flawed. It redirects capital and human ingenuity away from a destructive, declining industry towards the vibrant, sustainable growth sectors of the future. The quote, pragmatic approach Ms. Rossi advocates sounds reasonable, but, in practice, has led to decades of insufficient action. It provides loopholes and delays that fossil fuel incumbents exploit. Finally, the equity issue is critical. A just transition isn't merely a hopeful add-on, it must be central. Redirecting the estimated $7 trillion in annual global fossil fuel subsidies, explicit and implicit, provides ample resources to fund retraining, social safety nets, and clean energy deployment in vulnerable communities and developing nations. A ban makes this redirection politically feasible.
Thank you, Mr. Tanaka. Ms. Rossi, your rebuttal.
Mr. Tanaka speaks compellingly about the potential of renewables and the necessity of a just transition, ideals we largely share. However, the leap from regional successes or technological potential to implementing a complete global ban immediately overlooks critical constraints of scale, resources, and political reality. While the costs of inaction are indeed severe, the costs of a poorly executed, precipitous transition could be equally devastating, potentially leading to failed states and resource conflicts. Consider the sheer material requirements for a global build-out of solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, and upgraded grids at the speed Mr. Tanaka envisions. The demand for certain minerals, lithium, cobalt, rare earths, would explode, raising serious questions about supply chain sustainability, environmental impacts of mining, and geopolitical concentration of resources. Are we prepared for these new dependencies and potential bottlenecks? Moreover, the challenge of hard-to-abate sectors remains significant. While progress is being made, Commercially viable, scalable, zero-carbon solutions for long-haul aviation, shipping, steel, and cement production are not yet fully mature. A ban would effectively cripple these essential global industries without readily available alternatives. The concept of redirecting $7 trillion in global subsidies for a just transition sounds appealing. But the political economy is immensely complex. Gaining global consensus to eliminate all subsidies and effectively redistribute those funds faces enormous hurdles related to national sovereignty, competing priorities, and potential corruption. It's far from a guaranteed funding stream. We must also be wary of unintended consequences. A strict ban in cooperating nations could simply shift fossil fuel production and consumption to less regulated jurisdictions, leading to carbon leakage and potentially empowering authoritarian regimes rich in fossil fuels. Geopolitical stability linked to energy access is a serious concern. Therefore, while accelerating the transition is paramount, maintaining technological neutrality is crucial. We need continued innovation across a portfolio of solutions. Renewables, storage, efficiency, yes, but also potentially next-generation nuclear, hydrogen derived via various pathways, and CCUS, to ensure we have the tools to decarbonize the entire economy, not just the easy parts, in a stable and equitable manner.
Thank you both. We have time for one brief final exchange. Let's focus on international cooperation. Mr. Tanaka, how enforceable is a global ban, realistically, without universal agreement, potentially leading to the carbon leakage Ms. Rossi mentioned?
Enforcement requires strong international agreements, potentially involving carbon border adjustment mechanisms, CBAMs, to penalize imports from non-compliant nations. A coalition of major economies committing to a ban could create significant global momentum and pressure others to join, leveraging trade and diplomatic influence. It's challenging, but not impossible if the political will exists.
Ms. Rossi, a final brief thought on that point, or the role of unforeseen technological breakthroughs.
CBAMs are complex and risk trade disputes. Relying solely on them for global enforcement of a total ban seems overly optimistic. We need broad cooperation built on shared interests and differentiated responsibilities, alongside fostering innovation across all promising technological pathways, as breakthroughs could significantly alter the transition landscape, making currently difficult sectors easier to decarbonize, without resorting to potentially destabilizing bans.
Thank you. We now move to closing statements. Mr. Tanaka, please summarize your position.
In conclusion, the overwhelming scientific evidence and the profound ethical considerations compel us towards a single, clear course of action: a complete ban on fossil fuels. The risks of continuing our dependency, climate catastrophe, public health crises, ecological collapse, are simply unacceptable. Arguments about economic disruption and technological readiness fail to grasp the true scale of the climate threat and underestimate our capacity for innovation when faced with necessity. Incrementalism has failed. Gradualism is insufficient. A ban is not about ending prosperity. It is about redefining it for the 21st century. It unlocks a future powered by clean, abundant energy, fostering healthier environments, a stable climate, and sustainable economic opportunities for all. We possess the technology and the potential resources. What is required now is the courage and political leadership to enact this necessary transformation. For the sake of current and future generations, we must choose decisive action over continued catastrophic delay.
Thank you, Mr. Tanaka. Ms. Rossi, your closing statement.
To conclude, let me reiterate, the goal of deep decarbonization is essential and shared. However, a complete, immediate ban on fossil fuels is fundamentally the wrong instrument to achieve this goal. It is too blunt, carries immense risks of economic and social destabilization, and ignores critical technological and geopolitical realities. The pragmatic challenges concerning economic stability, energy security, social equity, particularly for developing nations, and the technological readiness to replace all fossil fuel uses simultaneously remain profound. Ignoring these complexities does not make them disappear. We need an ambitious, determined, but crucially, a managed transition. This involves a portfolio of solutions, aggressive deployment of renewables, massive investment in grid infrastructure and storage, effective carbon pricing, targeted support for innovation in hard-to-abate sectors, and robust policies ensuring a just transition. We must avoid ideological rigidity that could lead to policy failure, public backlash, and ultimately hinder, rather than help, our climate goals. Realism, strategic planning, and international cooperation based on achievable steps are paramount in tackling this complex global challenge effectively.
Thank you, Ms. Rossi, and thank you, Mr. Tanaka, for your insightful, rigorous, and thought-provoking contributions to this critical debate. You have clearly articulated the central points of contention, primarily the necessary pace and methodology for phasing out fossil fuels, the stark choice between an immediate, comprehensive ban versus a structured, albeit ambitious, managed transition. While both perspectives acknowledge the gravity of the climate challenge, they offer profoundly different assessments of the risks, feasibility, and consequences of the proposed solutions. This dialogue underscores the difficult choices and necessary, ongoing conversations societies worldwide must engage in as we navigate our energy future and confront the climate crisis. Thank you to